Guard Captain Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform pressed to perfection, and his famous bearskin hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. For 15 years, he had maintained this position with military precision, never breaking character, never showing emotion. The tourists loved taking photos with the stoic guards, often trying to make them laugh or smile. Marcus had seen it all. On this particular Tuesday morning, the autumn air carried a chill that made his breath visible in small puffs. The usual crowd of visitors gathered around the palace gates, cameras ready, children pointing excitedly at the guards. Marcus kept his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol demanded. Then he heard it, a small frightened sob coming from somewhere below his line of sight. His training told him to ignore it, to maintain his position no matter what. But something about the sound tugged at his heart, in a way that 15 years of service hadn't prepared him for. A tiny girl, no more than 5 years old, had somehow slipped away from the tourist group and now stood directly in front of Marcus, tears streaming down her rosy cheeks. She wore a bright yellow raincoat that was too big for her small frame, and her dark curls were messy from the morning wind. She looked up at Marcus with wide, scared eyes. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chatter of the crowd. Marcus felt his heart clench. Every fiber of his being as a father and human being wanted to help this child immediately. But his duty as a royal guard demanded he remain motionless and silent. He could see other tourists starting to notice the situation, some pulling out their phones to record what they probably thought would be an amusing interaction. The little girl reached out and gently touched Marcus's gloved hand. "Please, sir, can you help me find my mommy? I'm scared." For a moment that felt like eternity. Marcus struggled internally. His commanding officer's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the strict rules that governed his position. Royal guards were not to break character under any circumstances. They were living statues, symbols of British tradition and discipline. But as he looked down at the child's tear-stained face, Marcus realized that some things were more important than protocol. In that instant, he made a decision that would change everything. Slowly, carefully, Marcus broke his stance. He knelt down to the little girl's level, his movements deliberate and gentle. The crowd around them fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Marcus asked softly, his voice kind and reassuring. "Emma," she replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Emma Johnson. My mommy has blonde hair and she's wearing a blue coat. We were looking at the pretty horses and then I saw a butterfly and followed it, and now I can't find her anywhere." Marcus nodded understandingly. "Well, Emma Johnson, my name is Captain Marcus and I'm going to help you find your mommy. But first, are you hurt anywhere? Did anyone try to take you somewhere you didn't want to go?" Emma shook her head. "No, I just got lost looking at the butterfly. It was so pretty and orange with black spots." Relief washed over Marcus. This was simply a case of a curious child wandering off, not something more sinister. He gently took Emma's hand and stood up, his trained eyes immediately scanning the growing crowd for a frantic woman in a blue coat. "Officer Thompson, what are you doing?" came a sharp voice from behind him. Sergeant Williams, his immediate superior, had approached with obvious disapproval written across his face. Marcus turned, still holding Emma's hand. "Sir, this child is lost and frightened. I'm assisting in reuniting her with her family." "You know the rules about breaking character," Sergeant Williams said sternly, though Marcus could see conflict in the man's eyes as well. Before Marcus could respond, a woman's desperate voice cut through the crowd. Emma, where are you?" A blonde woman in a blue coat came rushing through the tourists, her face pale with panic. When she spotted Emma holding Marcus's hand, relief flooded her features. "Mommy!" Emma cried out, running toward her mother. The woman scooped Emma up in her arms, holding her tight. "Oh my goodness, Emma, you scared Mommy so much. I told you not to wander off." She looked at Marcus with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus smiled warmly. "Just doing what any father would do, ma'am. Emma is a brave little girl. She stayed calm and asked for help when she needed it." The crowd that had gathered began to applaud. What had started as typical tourist curiosity had transformed into something beautiful, a moment where humanity triumphed over rigid rules. Emma's mother approached Marcus again. I'm Sarah Johnson. Is there any way I can thank you properly? What you did? Breaking protocol to help my daughter. It means everything to me. No thanks necessary. Mrs. Johnson, just keep that little explorer close to you, Marcus replied with a gentle laugh. As the crowd began to disperse and the Johnsons prepared to leave, Emma ran back to Marcus one more time. She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a crumpled drawing she had made earlier that morning. "This is for you, Captain Marcus," she said shyly, handing him the paper. "It's a picture of you helping me find my mommy." Marcus looked at the drawing. Stick figures in bright crayon colors showing a tall guard holding hands with a small girl. In the corner, Emma had written "My hero" in wobbly letters. As he watched Emma and her mother disappear into the crowd, Marcus carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his jacket pocket, close to his heart. He knew he might face consequences for his actions, but he also knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. Sergeant Williams approached him once more, but his expression had softened. "That was either the most foolish or most admirable thing I've seen in my 20 years of service, Thompson." Marcus straightened his uniform and prepared to resume his position. "Some things are more important than following orders, sir. That little girl needed help, and I couldn't just stand there and watch her cry." The sergeant nodded slowly, a slight smile crossing his face. "Carry on, Captain. And Thompson? Well done." 3 months after the Emma Johnson incident, Guard James Mitchell found himself stationed at Windsor Castle during the annual Christmas market. The festive atmosphere filled the air with the scent of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts, while families strolled between wooden stalls selling handmade crafts and holiday treats. James stood at attention near the main entrance, his breath forming small clouds in the December air. The young guard had heard about Captain Thompson's decision to help the lost child, and it had sparked many conversations among the guards about when duty should bend for human compassion. James had always been a by-the-book soldier, following every rule to the letter. At 24, he was one of the youngest guards in the regiment and felt he had everything to prove. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard, James noticed an elderly man struggling with a heavy suitcase near the castle gates. The man appeared to be in his 80s with silver hair and a worn tweed coat that had seen better days. He kept stopping every few steps, clearly exhausted and in discomfort. James watched as tourists walked past the elderly gentleman without offering assistance. Some even seemed annoyed that he was moving slowly and blocking their path to the perfect photo spot. The old man's face was flushed with effort, and James could see him breathing heavily. The guard's training kicked in immediately. He was not supposed to leave his post or interact with civilians unless there was a direct security threat. His job was to remain motionless and alert, a living symbol of the monarchy's steadfast protection. But watching the elderly man struggle alone went against every instinct James had as a human being. The old man stumbled slightly, catching himself against a stone pillar. That was the moment James made his decision. "Sir, are you all right?" James asked, stepping forward from his position. The elderly gentleman looked up with surprise, clearly not expecting one of the famously silent guards to speak. "Oh my, yes, I'm fine. Just having a bit of trouble with this old suitcase. It's heavier than I remembered." James could see that the man was far from fine. His hands were shaking slightly, and there was a worrying pallor to his complexion. "Where are you trying to get to, sir? Perhaps I can help you with your luggage." "That's very kind of you, young man, but I couldn't possibly ask you to leave your important duties. I'm just trying to get to the train station. My granddaughter is getting married tomorrow in London, and I've been staying here in Windsor for a few days. This suitcase has all my formal clothes for the wedding." The train station was at least a 15-minute walk from the castle, much too far for someone in the elderly man's condition to manage alone with heavy luggage. James looked around and spotted Corporal Davies, another guard who was stationed nearby. "Davies, can you cover my position for 20 minutes? James called out quietly. Corporal Davies nodded, understanding immediately what his colleague intended to do. James gently took the suitcase from the elderly man's hands. "I'm James Mitchell, sir, and I insist on helping you get to the station safely." "What's your name?" "Albert Whitmore," the old man replied with obvious relief. "And I must say this is incredibly kind of you. I've heard stories about you guards being like statues, but you're certainly breaking that image today." As they began walking toward the station, Albert told James about his life. He was a retired school teacher who had served in the Royal Navy during his younger years. His granddaughter Claire was marrying a doctor, and Albert was the only family member who could walk her down the aisle since her father had passed away the previous year. "I wouldn't miss this wedding for anything in the world," Albert said, pausing to rest on a bench halfway to the station. "Claire means everything to me. When her parents died in that car accident 5 years ago, she moved in with me. We've been taking care of each other ever since." James felt a deep connection to Albert's story. His own grandfather had been his hero growing up, and he understood the special bond between grandparents and grandchildren. "She's lucky to have you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm sure you'll make a wonderful father figure at her wedding." Albert smiled warmly. "You know, James, you remind me of my grandson. He's in the military, too, stationed overseas right now. I wish he could be at the wedding, but duty calls, as they say." They continued their journey, with James carrying not only the heavy suitcase but also Albert's jacket when the old man became too warm from the exertion. As they neared the train station, James noticed that Albert was moving more slowly and seemed to be having trouble breathing. "Mr. Whitmore, are you feeling all right? Would you like to sit down for a moment?" Albert waved his hand dismissively. "Just a bit winded, my boy. Old age catching up with me, I'm afraid. But I'll be fine once I'm on the train." At the station, James helped Albert purchase his ticket and navigate through the busy terminal. The evening commuter rush had begun, and the station was crowded with people hurrying to catch their trains. James made sure Albert had a comfortable seat on the platform and stayed with him until the train arrived. "James, I cannot thank you enough," Albert said as the train pulled into the station. "You've gone far above and beyond what anyone would expect. Your kindness has made this difficult journey possible for me." James helped Albert board the train and made sure his suitcase was safely stored. As he was about to leave, Albert grabbed his hand. "Wait, I want to give you something." Albert reached into his wallet and pulled out a small, faded photograph. "This is a picture of me and my late wife on our wedding day 60 years ago. I want you to have it as a reminder that small acts of kindness can change someone's entire world." James looked at the photograph showing a young Albert in his naval uniform, standing next to a beautiful woman in a white wedding dress. Both were beaming with happiness and hope for their future together. "Mr. Whitmore, I can't take this. It's too precious to you. Please, I insist. You've shown me that there are still good people in this world who care about others. That gives an old man hope for the future." As the train began to pull away from the station, Albert waved goodbye from his window seat. James stood on the platform holding the photograph carefully, feeling overwhelmed by the profound impact such a simple act of kindness could have on another person's life. Walking back to Windsor Castle, James reflected on what had just happened. He had broken protocol, left his post, and spent nearly an hour helping a complete stranger. By military standards, his actions were questionable, but by human standards, they were exactly right. When he returned to his position, Corporal Davies approached him with a knowing smile. "How did it go?" "Better than I could have imagined," James replied, carefully placing Albert's photograph in his jacket pocket. Some things are more important than standing perfectly still. The next day, James received a card delivered to the castle. Inside was a wedding photo of Albert walking a beautiful young woman down the aisle, both of them radiant with joy. On the back, Claire had written, "Thank you for helping my grandfather get to my wedding. Your kindness meant the world to both of us." The spring morning at St. James's Palace brought with it the kind of gentle warmth that made London feel alive again after a long winter. Guard Rebecca Harrison stood at her post, watching the steady stream of tourists who came to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony. At 28, Rebecca was one of the few female guards in the regiment, and she took immense pride in representing her gender with dignity and strength. The ceremony had concluded an hour earlier, and now Rebecca maintained her solitary watch outside the palace gates. She had heard the stories about Captain Thompson helping the lost child and Guard Mitchell, assisting the elderly gentleman. These tales had spread through the ranks, creating quiet conversations about the balance between duty and compassion. Rebecca had always been disciplined to the core. Growing up as the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, she learned early that success required unwavering focus and dedication. Her path to becoming a Royal Guard had been challenging, facing skepticism from some colleagues who questioned whether women belonged in such traditional roles. She had proven herself time and again, never giving anyone reason to doubt her commitment or capabilities. As she stood in perfect formation, Rebecca noticed a commotion across the street. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, sat on a bench with her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. She wore a simple black dress and clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her shaking hands. Despite the busy foot traffic around her, no one seemed to notice her distress or offer any assistance. Rebecca's training told her to remain focused on her primary responsibility of guarding the palace. Personal interactions with civilians were strictly regulated, especially for someone in her position who had worked so hard to prove herself worthy of respect. Breaking protocol could provide ammunition for critics who already questioned women's place in the guard. But as minutes passed, the young woman's crying intensified. Rebecca could see her shoulders shaking with each sob, and it became clear that she was experiencing some kind of crisis. The guard's maternal instincts began to override her military training, especially when she noticed several people walking by who seemed more interested in taking photos of the distressed woman than offering help. The turning point came when Rebecca saw a man approach the crying woman with what appeared to be predatory intentions. He sat down next to her, putting his arm around her shoulders despite her obvious discomfort, and began speaking to her in a way that made Rebecca's protective instincts surge. "Excuse me, sir?" Rebecca called out firmly, stepping away from her post. "The young lady appears to need some space." The man looked up with surprise and irritation. "Mind your own business, love. We're just having a conversation." Rebecca moved closer, her authoritative presence immediately changing the dynamic of the situation. "I can see that the lady is uncomfortable with your attention. I suggest you move along." The woman looked up at Rebecca with relief in her tear-filled eyes. "Please, I don't know him. He just sat down and won't leave me alone." "You heard her," Rebecca said to the man, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. "Find somewhere else to be." Grumbling under his breath about interfering guards, the man reluctantly walked away. Rebecca turned her attention to the distressed young woman, kneeling down to her level with genuine concern. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention or help contacting someone?" The woman shook her head, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "No, I'm not physically hurt. I'm sorry for causing such a scene. I'm Amy Chen, and I just received some terrible news." Rebecca could see that Amy was struggling to compose herself. "What kind of news, if you don't mind me asking?" "Sometimes talking to a stranger can help." Amy held up the crumpled paper in her hands. "I just got rejected from medical school. It was my third application, my last chance. I've been working toward this dream for 6 years. Taking extra classes, volunteering at hospitals, studying every spare moment I had. And now it's over." The pain in Amy's voice was heartbreaking. Rebecca sat down on the bench beside her, momentarily forgetting about protocol and regulations. "I'm sorry, Amy, that must feel devastating right now." "It is," Amy continued, her voice breaking. "My parents sacrificed everything to help me get through university. They worked extra shifts, saved every penny they could. I was supposed to be the first doctor in our family. Now I have to go home and tell them that all their sacrifice was for nothing." Rebecca felt a deep empathy for Amy's situation. She understood the weight of family expectations and the crushing disappointment of having dreams seemingly shattered. "Amy, can I tell you something? Rejection doesn't mean your dreams are impossible. It just means the path might be different than you originally planned." Amy looked at Rebecca skeptically. "Easy for you to say. You probably achieved everything you set out to do." Rebecca laughed gently. "Actually, I failed my first attempt at guard training. I was told I wasn't strong enough, wasn't tough enough, wasn't suited for this kind of work. Some people suggested I consider a different career path entirely." This seemed to capture Amy's attention. "Really? But you're here now, in one of the most prestigious positions in the military." "Yes, but it took 3 attempts, 2 years of additional training, and more determination than I knew I possessed. The rejection taught me that I needed to approach my goal differently, not abandon it entirely." Rebecca could see something shift in Amy's expression, a small spark of hope beginning to return. "What did you do differently the third time?" Amy asked. "I stopped trying to prove I was just like everyone else and started embracing what made me unique. I focused on my strengths instead of trying to fix my perceived weaknesses. And I found mentors who believed in me when I stopped believing in myself." Amy nodded slowly, seeming to process this advice. "So you think I should try again?" I think you should give yourself time to grieve this disappointment, and then decide what you really want. If becoming a doctor is still your dream, then explore every possible path to get there. Maybe it's a different medical school. Maybe it's gaining more experience first. Maybe it's finding a program that values your unique perspective. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the busy London street life continue around them. Finally, Amy stood up and straightened her dress. Thank you, Rebecca. I don't even know your last name, but you've helped me more in 10 minutes than anyone has in weeks. I think I'm going to go home, have a good cry, and then start researching other options. Before you go, Rebecca said, reaching into her jacket pocket, I want to give you something. She handed Amy a small card with contact information. This is my cousin Sarah's information. She's a doctor who also faced multiple rejections before getting into medical school. She volunteers as a mentor for students in similar situations. Tell her I sent you. Amy's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to be tears of gratitude rather than despair. I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to help me, especially not like this. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us that setbacks aren't endings, Rebecca replied. You have something special inside you, Amy. Don't let one rejection letter convince you otherwise. As Amy walked away with renewed purpose in her step, Rebecca returned to her post. She knew she had broken protocol by leaving her station and engaging in an extended personal conversation with a civilian. She also knew she had made the right choice. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Williams approached Rebecca during her break. Guard Harrison, I understand you had an interaction with a civilian earlier today. Rebecca straightened, prepared for disciplinary action. Yes, sir. A young woman was in distress, and there was also a situation with a man who was bothering her inappropriately. Sergeant Williams nodded thoughtfully. Several witnesses reported that you handled the situation with professionalism and compassion. They were particularly impressed with how you protected the young woman from unwanted attention. Rebecca was surprised by this response. Sir, I realize I broke protocol by leaving my post. Guard Harrison, protocol exists to maintain order and discipline. But judgment exists to know when human decency requires us to act beyond the rules. You demonstrated excellent judgment today. 6 months later, Rebecca received a letter from Amy Chen. She had been accepted into a medical program at Edinburgh University and was thriving in her studies. The letter included a photo of Amy in her white coat smiling broadly with a handwritten note. Thank you for showing me that rejection is just redirection. You changed my life that day. The summer heat at Buckingham Palace was unusually intense for London, making the heavy red tunics and bearskin hats of the Royal Guards even more challenging to endure. Guard David Walsh had been on duty for 3 hours, standing motionless in the blazing sun, when he first noticed the small group of protesters gathering across the street. David was a 26-year-old guard from Northern Ireland who had joined the regiment 2 years earlier. He was known among his colleagues for his calm demeanor and ability to remain composed under pressure. The stories of his fellow guards helping civilians had spread throughout their ranks, creating an atmosphere where compassion was increasingly valued alongside duty. The protesters were a mixed group of about 15 people, ranging from teenagers to elderly individuals. They held signs demanding action on climate change and calling for government accountability. Their demonstration was peaceful and legal, taking place in the designated area for public protest near the palace. David watched them with professional interest, noting that they were well organized and respectful of boundaries. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature continued to climb. David could feel sweat running down his back under his thick uniform, but he maintained his stoic expression and perfect posture. The protesters, however, were beginning to show signs of heat exhaustion. Several of the older participants had moved to whatever shade they could find, and David noticed one elderly woman swaying slightly on her feet. The woman appeared to be in her 70s, with gray hair and wearing a light summer dress. She held a sign that read, "Save the planet for my grandchildren," and had been one of the most vocal participants in their chants. But now she was clearly struggling with the heat, her face flushed red and her breathing labored. David watched with growing concern as the woman stumbled and nearly fell. A younger protester caught her arm and helped her sit down on the pavement, but it was clear she needed more assistance than her fellow demonstrators could provide. The situation was becoming potentially dangerous. Following protocol, David should alert the police or emergency services and continue his duties without direct intervention. Personal involvement with protesters, even to provide assistance, could be seen as taking a political stance. The Royal Guards were meant to remain neutral and detached from all civilian affairs, but as David watched the elderly woman's condition deteriorate, he realized that this wasn't about politics or protests. This was about a human being in medical distress who needed immediate help. "Officer Chen," David called quietly to a nearby colleague. "Can you cover my position for a few minutes?" Without waiting for a response, David stepped away from his post and approached the group of protesters. His sudden movement caused quite a stir, with several people pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be some kind of confrontation. "Excuse me," David said, addressing the younger protester who was helping the elderly woman. "I have some medical training. May I check on your friend?" The group looked surprised but grateful. The young man supporting the elderly woman nodded quickly. "Yes, please. Mrs. Patterson has been feeling dizzy for the last 10 minutes, and she seems to be getting worse." David knelt beside Mrs. Patterson, his heavy uniform making the movement awkward, but his concern overriding any discomfort. "Mrs. Patterson, my name is David. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now?" The elderly woman looked up at him with unfocused eyes. I'm very hot and dizzy. I think I might be sick." David could see all the classic signs of heat exhaustion: excessive sweating, pale and clammy skin, rapid heartbeat, and disorientation. He knew this could quickly progress to heat stroke, which would be life-threatening. "We need to get you cooled down immediately," David said, looking around for solutions. The nearest building was across a busy street, and Mrs. Patterson was in no condition to walk that distance. David made a quick decision. He removed his heavy ceremonial jacket and used it to create a makeshift sunshade over Mrs. Patterson. Then he took off his own water bottle from his belt and offered it to her. "Small sips," he instructed gently. "Don't drink too fast." One of the other protesters, a teenager with bright green hair, spoke up. "Is she going to be okay? Should we call an ambulance?" "Let's see how she responds to cooling down first," David replied, loosening Mrs. Patterson's collar and fanning her with one of their protest signs. "But yes, we should call for medical assistance just to be safe." As word spread through the crowd about what was happening, David found himself surrounded by a diverse group of people who had put aside their protest to focus on helping their fellow activist. Someone produced a portable fan, another person had an ice pack from their cooler, and several people formed a human shield to block more of the sun. "You know," said an older gentleman in the group, "I've been protesting outside government buildings for 40 years, and I've never seen a guard break ranks to help like this." David continued monitoring Mrs. Patterson's condition while they waited for paramedics. "Ma'am, what made you decide to come out and protest today in this heat?" Mrs. Patterson managed a weak smile. "My granddaughter Lily is only 8 years old. I want her to inherit a world worth living in. Sometimes an old woman has to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." "That's very admirable," David said sincerely. "Lily is lucky to have such a dedicated grandmother." "Are you not supposed to be talking to us?" asked the teenager with green hair. "I thought you guards weren't allowed to break character or get involved with protesters." David considered the question carefully. "Normally you'd be right, but when someone needs medical help, the rules change. You're not protesters to me right now. You're people, and one of your friends is in trouble." When the paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, Mrs. Patterson's condition had stabilized significantly. The combination of cooling, hydration, and rest had brought her temperature down and restored some clarity to her thinking. Did excellent first aid," the lead paramedic told David as they prepared to transport Mrs. Patterson to the hospital as a precaution. "Your quick response probably prevented this from becoming much more serious." As Mrs. Patterson was helped into the ambulance, she reached out and grasped David's hand. "Thank you, dear boy. You've shown more kindness in 10 minutes than some people show in a lifetime." The crowd of protesters began to disperse, but several approached David before leaving. The young man who had first been helping Mrs. Patterson shook his hand warmly. "I have to admit, I came here today with a pretty negative view of authority figures. But what you did changed my perspective. You saw a person in need and helped, regardless of our different positions." The teenager with green hair pulled out her phone and showed David a video she had recorded. "This is going viral already. People are calling you the compassionate guard. Is it okay if I keep sharing it? David thought for a moment. If it helps show people that we're all human beings first, regardless of our uniforms or our causes, then yes, share it. As David walked back to his post, putting his ceremonial jacket back on despite the continuing heat, he reflected on what had just happened. He had broken multiple protocols, engaged with protesters, and created a scene that would certainly reach his superior's attention. Officer Chen approached him with a knowing smile. That was either going to get you in serious trouble or serious commendation. Based on the crowd's reaction and the media attention, I'm thinking it might be the latter. That evening, David received a call from his commanding officer requesting a meeting the next morning. He prepared himself for potential disciplinary action, but also felt peaceful about his choice. Mrs. Patterson was safe, and he had acted according to his conscience and training. To his surprise, the meeting resulted in commendation rather than punishment. His superiors had reviewed witness statements, social media coverage, and the paramedics' report. They concluded that David had demonstrated exceptional judgment, medical competence, and humanitarianism that reflected positively on the entire regiment. 3 weeks later, David received a letter from Mrs. Patterson, who had made a full recovery. She included a photo of herself with her 8-year-old granddaughter Lily, both of them holding a thank you card they had made together. The card read, "Thank you for showing us that kindness has no uniform." The autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestones outside the Tower of London, creating puddles that reflected the ancient fortress's imposing walls. Guard Thomas Bennett stood beneath the stone archway, grateful for the shelter as he watched tourists hurry past with umbrellas and raincoats. At 31, Thomas was one of the more experienced guards in his unit. Known for his attention to detail and unwavering professionalism, the weather had kept the usual crowds away, leaving the historic site quieter than normal. Thomas had been following the stories of his colleagues' acts of kindness with growing interest. Each incident had sparked conversations throughout the regiment about the balance between duty and humanity, and Thomas found himself more aware of the people around him than ever before. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas noticed a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, standing alone near the tower's entrance. The child was soaked through, his thin jacket offering little protection against the persistent rain. He clutched a small backpack tightly and kept looking around anxiously, as if searching for someone. At first, Thomas assumed the boy was simply waiting for family members who had gone inside one of the buildings. But after 20 minutes of watching the child shiver in the cold rain, scanning faces in the sparse crowd with increasing desperation, Thomas began to worry. The boy had sandy brown hair that was now plastered to his head, and his clothes suggested he wasn't dressed for tourist activities. His shoes were worn and his backpack looked like it contained more than just day trip supplies. Most concerning to Thomas was the look of genuine fear and confusion in the child's eyes. Thomas struggled with his protocol training. He was supposed to remain at his designated position and alert other authorities if he suspected a problem. Direct intervention with civilians, especially children, required careful consideration and proper channels. But something about this situation felt urgent, and the boy's increasing distress was becoming impossible to ignore. When Thomas saw the child start to wander toward the busy street, seemingly without direction or awareness of traffic, he made his decision. "Son, are you all right?" Thomas called out, stepping forward from his sheltered position into the rain. The boy turned toward him with startled eyes. Up close, Thomas could see that the child had been crying, his face streaked with tears mixed with rainwater. "I can't find my dad," the boy said in a small, scared voice. Thomas knelt down to the boy's level, immediately feeling the cold rain soaking through his uniform. "What's your name, and when did you last see your father?" "I'm Oliver Mason. My dad and I were supposed to meet here at 2 o'clock, but he never came. I've been waiting for 3 hours now and I don't know what to do." Thomas felt his heart sink. 3 hours was far too long for a planned meeting delay, especially with a child involved. "Oliver, where were you and your dad staying? Do you have his phone number?" The boy nodded and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "We're staying at my aunt's house, but I don't remember the address exactly, and Dad's phone keeps going to voicemail. I tried calling from the payphone, but I ran out of coins." Thomas examined the paper, which had a phone number written in a child's handwriting, along with some illegible notes that had been smudged by the rain. Oliver, this is important. Did your dad seem sick or upset when you separated this morning? Was there any reason he might not be able to come meet you? Oliver's lower lip trembled as he considered the question. Dad has been really sad since Mom died last year. Sometimes he gets confused and forgets things. The doctor said it's because he's depressed, but I thought he was getting better. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain. This wasn't just a case of a delayed parent. This could be a mental health crisis that had left a vulnerable child stranded and alone. Oliver, I want you to stay right here with me while I make some phone calls, okay? You're safe now and we're going to figure this out together. Thomas guided the boy back under the stone archway, out of the worst of the rain. Using his radio, Thomas contacted his supervisor and briefly explained the situation. Within minutes, he had approval to leave his post, and assistance from both police and social services was on the way. But Thomas knew that bureaucratic help would take time, and Oliver needed immediate care and comfort. Are you hungry? Thomas asked, noticing that Oliver looked thin and pale. When did you last eat something? I had a sandwich this morning before Dad left to run errands.
He said he'd buy us lunch when he picked me up.
But Oliver's voice trailed off as the reality of his situation became clearer to him. Thomas reached into his own lunch bag and pulled out a sandwich and a thermos of hot soup his wife had packed for him that morning. Here, you need to eat something, and this soup will help warm you up. As Oliver gratefully accepted the food, Thomas continued trying to piece together the situation. Can you tell me more about your aunt? Do you know her name or what part of London she lives in? Aunt Sarah. She lives near a big park with ducks. Dad said we were staying with her until he finds a new job. Oliver paused between bites of sandwich. We had to move out of our old house after Mom died because Dad couldn't pay for it anymore. The picture was becoming clearer and more heartbreaking. Thomas realized he was dealing with a grieving father who was struggling with depression and financial hardship, trying to care for his young son while rebuilding their lives. Something had gone wrong today, and now Oliver was caught in the middle of an adult crisis he couldn't understand or control. Oliver, I want you to know that none of this is your fault, Thomas said gently. Sometimes adults go through very difficult times and they need help to get through them. We're going to make sure you're safe while we find your dad. A police constable arrived within 15 minutes, followed shortly by a social worker. Thomas remained with Oliver throughout their initial questioning, providing a calming presence for the frightened child. Oliver had clearly developed trust in the kind guard who had shared his lunch and stayed with him in the rain. The social worker, a middle-aged woman named Janet Williams, took over coordination of the search efforts. We've been trying the phone number Oliver provided, but it goes straight to voicemail. We're also checking local hospitals and police stations to see if his father has been reported missing, or if there have been any incidents. Thomas knelt beside Oliver one more time before the authorities prepared to take him to a safe location, while the search continued. I need you to be brave for a little while longer, Oliver. These people are experts at finding missing persons, and they're going to take very good care of you. Oliver looked up at Thomas with eyes that seemed far too mature for a 10-year-old. Will you help look for my dad too? I trust you. I promise I'll do everything I can, Thomas replied, genuinely moved by the child's faith in him. After Oliver left with the social worker, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he could do. During his break, he called his wife Emma, who worked as a nurse at a nearby hospital. Emma, I need you to check if anyone matching this description was brought in today, Thomas said, providing details about Oliver's father. A man in his 30s, possibly suffering from depression, might have had some kind of medical emergency or breakdown. Emma called back within an hour. Thomas, there's a man here who matches that description. He was brought in this afternoon after collapsing on a street about 2 miles from the tower. He's been unconscious, and he had no identification when they found him. He's stable now, but he's been asking for someone named Oliver. Thomas immediately contacted Janet Williams with this information. Within 2 hours, Oliver was reunited with his father at the hospital. Thomas received permission to visit them the next day during his time off. When he arrived at the hospital, Thomas found Oliver sitting beside his father's bed, both of them looking much better than they had the day before. Oliver's father, David Mason, was awake and alert, though clearly exhausted. You must be the guard who helped my son, David said, extending his hand to Thomas. Oliver has told me everything you did for him yesterday. I don't know how to thank you. How are you feeling, Mr. Mason? Thomas asked, genuinely concerned. David's expression grew serious. The doctors say I had a panic attack that led to fainting. I've been struggling since my wife died, and yesterday I just broke down. I was supposed to pick up Oliver, but I couldn't even remember where I was or what day it was. The thought of him waiting there alone, scared and confused. David's voice broke. Dad's going to get help, Oliver interjected, taking his father's hand. The hospital has doctors who specialize in helping people who are sad like Dad has been. Thomas smiled at Oliver's mature understanding of the situation. That sounds like a very good plan. And Oliver, you were incredibly brave yesterday. You did exactly the right thing by asking for help when you needed it. Over the following weeks, Thomas kept in touch with the Mason family. David entered a treatment program for depression and grief counseling, while Oliver stayed temporarily with his Aunt Sarah, who turned out to live just a few miles from the Tower of London, near Regent's Park, which indeed had ducks. The story of Thomas's compassionate response to Oliver's crisis spread throughout the Royal Guard community and beyond. Unlike some of the previous incidents, this one The crisp winter morning at Buckingham Palace brought with it an unusual buzz of activity. Colonel William Hartwell, the commanding officer of the Queen's Guard, stood reviewing the duty roster when his aide approached with a concerned expression. "Sir, we have a situation developing at the main gates. A group of military veterans has been gathering since dawn, and their numbers are growing." Colonel Hartwell looked up from his paperwork. At 52, he had served in the military for over 30 years and had commanded the Queen's Guard for the past 5 years. During his tenure, he had witnessed the remarkable stories of guards who had broken protocol to help civilians in need. These incidents had challenged his traditional views on military discipline while earning widespread public admiration. "What kind of situation, Sergeant Morrison? Are they protesting something?" "Not exactly, sir. They appear to be homeless veterans and they're not being disruptive. But they're clearly in distress and the media is starting to take notice." Colonel Hartwell grabbed his coat and walked outside to assess the situation personally. What he saw moved him deeply. About 20 men and women, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s, sat quietly along the palace fence. Many showed obvious signs of homelessness, worn clothing, weathered faces, and the hollow look of people who had been struggling for a long time. Among them, Colonel Hartwell recognized the unmistakable bearing of former soldiers. Despite their circumstances, they sat with a certain dignity and order that spoke to their military training. Some wore pieces of old uniforms or military insignia, and he could see service medals pinned to worn jackets. Guard Captain Marcus Thompson, whose story of helping lost Emma had started a new tradition of compassion within the ranks, approached his commanding officer. "Sir, I've spoken with a few of them. They're all military veterans who have fallen on hard times. They're not here to cause trouble. They say they just want to be near a place that represents the country they served." Colonel Hartwell studied the group more carefully. He noticed an elderly man in a wheelchair, with what appeared to be legs amputated below the knee, a woman who seemed to be suffering from some kind of mental distress, and several younger veterans who looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Have any of them requested assistance or made specific demands?" The colonel asked. "No, sir. They've been respectful and quiet. Some of the tourists have been giving them money and food, but they're clearly in need of more substantial help than passers-by can provide." As Colonel Hartwell continued to observe, he noticed his own guards watching the situation with obvious concern and empathy. The stories of individual guards helping civilians had created a culture within the unit that valued compassion alongside discipline. He could see the internal struggle in his soldiers' faces as they maintained their posts while watching former comrades in obvious need. "Thompson, what's the protocol for a situation like this?" "Technically, sir, we should contact the police to clear them from the area if they're considered to be loitering. But given that they're veterans and they're not causing any disruption..." Colonel Hartwell nodded thoughtfully. He had spent his entire adult life following military protocol and maintaining the strict traditions of the Queen's Guard. But the past year had shown him that sometimes the most honorable action required looking beyond the rulebook. "Sergeant Morrison, contact the palace kitchen and see how much food we can arrange for about 20 people. Also, get in touch with local veteran support organizations and homeless services. Tell them we have a group of former service members who need immediate assistance." "Sir?" Sergeant Morrison looked surprised. "And Thompson, have our off-duty guards who volunteer to help serve the food and coordinate with the support services. This is not about breaking protocol. This is about taking care of our own. Within 2 hours, an extraordinary scene unfolded at Buckingham Palace. The palace kitchen had prepared hot meals, and several veteran support organizations had arrived with representatives and resources. Off-duty guards worked alongside civilian volunteers to provide food, warm clothing, and information about available services. Colonel Hartwell found himself sitting on the ground next to the elderly veteran in the wheelchair, a man named George Fletcher who had served in the Falklands War. George's legs had been lost to an improvised explosive device, and he had been living on the streets for 6 months after losing his apartment. "I never thought I'd end up like this, sir," George said quietly. 40 years ago, I was proud to serve my country. Now I can't even afford a place to sleep. George, your service still matters. What's happened to you since then doesn't diminish what you gave to this country." Colonel Hartwell replied, "But we've failed you, and that's something we need to fix." As the day progressed, Colonel Hartwell learned the individual stories of many veterans in the group. Sarah Martinez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, but struggled with post-traumatic stress that made it difficult to hold employment. Robert Quinn had been injured in a training accident that ended his career, leading to depression and addiction issues. Maria Santos had been discharged after suffering a traumatic brain injury that affected her ability to navigate complex systems like healthcare and housing assistance. Each story revealed how easily a person who had served their country with honor could fall through cracks in the support system. Colonel Hartwell realized that this wasn't just a random gathering of homeless individuals. It was a systematic failure to care for those who had sacrificed for their nation. The media attention that had initially concerned Colonel Hartwell turned into an opportunity. News crews captured images of Royal Guards serving meals to homeless veterans, and the story quickly spread across social media and television networks. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, donations began pouring in from across the United Kingdom and internationally. A fund was established specifically for veteran support services, and several major corporations offered job training and employment opportunities. Most importantly, government officials began discussing policy changes to better support veterans transitioning to civilian life. Colonel Hartwell found himself at the center of a movement he had never intended to start. Parliament invited him to testify about veteran homelessness, and he used the platform to speak passionately about the responsibility society had to care for those who had served. These men and women wrote a blank check to their country, payable up to and including their lives, he told the parliamentary committee. When they return home, we have an obligation to honor that sacrifice with more than just ceremonies and monuments. We must provide practical support that ensures no veteran sleeps on the street. 6 months after that winter morning at Buckingham Palace, Colonel Hartwell was promoted to brigadier and appointed to head a new government initiative for veteran support services. The program, nicknamed the Palace Protocol in honor of its origins, became a model for veteran assistance programs in other countries. George Fletcher, the elderly veteran in the wheelchair whom Colonel Hartwell had befriended, became the first resident of a new transitional housing facility, funded by the donations generated from the Palace incident. He also became an advocate for disabled veterans' rights, working with government officials to improve accessibility and support services. The Queen herself took notice of Colonel Hartwell's actions and the positive impact they had generated. During a private ceremony, she personally commended him for demonstrating that true military leadership sometimes requires the courage to act outside established protocols when human dignity is at stake. On the anniversary of that winter morning, Colonel Hartwell returned to Buckingham Palace to visit his former unit. The current guards had continued the tradition of compassionate service, and the walls of their break room were now decorated with thank you letters from people whose lives had been touched by individual acts of kindness from Royal Guards. Captain Thompson, now promoted to major, showed him the latest letter from Emma Johnson, the little girl he had helped find her mother 3 years earlier. She was now 8 years old and had written to tell them she wanted to become a police officer, so I can help people just like the nice guard helped me. "You know, Hartwell," said Major Thompson, "when I first decided to help that lost little girl, I thought I was just solving one small problem. I had no idea it would start something this significant. Colonel Hartwell smiled as he looked around the room filled with evidence of lives changed by compassion. Sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that feel the most natural at the time. You saw a child who needed help and you helped her. That simple act of humanity reminded all of us that duty and kindness aren't opposing forces. They're complementary virtues. As he prepared to leave, Colonel Hartwell paused at the window overlooking the palace gates where the homeless veterans had gathered that winter morning. The area was now home to a permanent information kiosk staffed by veteran support volunteers, ensuring that no former service member would ever again have to sit in desperation outside the symbol of the nation they had served. The legacy of the Royal Guards who chose kindness over protocol had grown into something larger than any of them had imagined, proving that individual acts of compassion,